Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you all for being here. I want to say a special welcome to the millions listening to the podcast. You're in the future, so I'm curious about what it's going to be like. But for now, we're in the present, and this book, The Work of Art, is, I told Adam this earlier, my favorite book of the year. My favorite book of the year. Now, I have one book in my bag on this trip that's a possible contender, because it's about both basketball and Columbus, Ohio. So there's a chance that, no, there's no chance. This is an incredible, this is an incredible book. And to me, the mark of a good book is that you're always thinking about it. You're always thinking about it. And even now in this little pre-session here, the number of conversations I've had about the book have been like rich and entertaining and interesting. So The Work of Art. So Adam, before we get started on the book itself, tell us, like, I think I'm always curious about, like, how'd you get here? Like, not like the subway or anything, but like
bicycle.
Where'd you grow up, and how'd you come into the world of magazines, and what are you doing now, and how did that lead you to this book?
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you all for coming. I'm really thrilled to be here, and thrilled that Dan is my interlocutor. The answer I guess I was born in Brooklyn. Grew up in the burbs. Hated the burbs.
What burbs?
A town called Hewlett near Kennedy Airport in Long Island.
Okay.
And wanted to get out of there, and my ticket to getting out of there really was reading magazines and reading the world that they conjured, the cosmopolitan, sophisticated, much more interesting than the town.
What magazines? So you said Cosmopolitan. I'm thinking that's not one of them.
That was not one of them.
No, yeah. So tell me, what are the magazines that
well,
really
I'm
spoke to you?
old, so this will date. First of all, it was first started with Mad Magazine, but that didn't quite.
Any Mad Magazine fans out there? Yeah, iconic, amazing, extraordinary.
So that was first, but then it was also the '60s. So Esquire, famously, for any magazine head, will know the run that Harold Hayes had as the editor of Esquire, and published this really kind of amazing, artistic, in a sense, magazine for his tenure, which bled into the '70s a bit. And then New York, where I later would go on to edit. My parents were charter subscribers. So the magazine came in, and it was sardonic and had a really interesting and edgy and vivid point of view about cities, about New York in particular, but about a certain urban way of looking at the world, which really, for whatever reason, was extremely attractive to my 12-year-old self. And so when I graduated college, I went and worked at Esquire. And
how'd you find your way into that job?
Connections.
And what'd you do? Were you fact checking?
No, this is okay. Yeah. So really, it started. It's more than all that. So the connections.
I'm trying not to turn this into a job interview.
Okay, wait. But the connections got me a summer internship at the Village Voice. The Village Voice was an amazing, lucky. Luck comes into all of what we're going to be talking about here, but it happened to be the summer of the New York newspaper strike. So the Village Voice, which was then, for those of you which is most of you, too young to remember this, but the Voice was really a vital and kind of thrilling newspaper magazine. But it was, very counterculture, and suddenly all the newspapers went on strike, and so it had to sort of move from the counterculture to the main culture very fast. They needed every hand on deck. I was an intern, and I got to man the city desk and to, report stories. It was kind of crazy, got me addicted to all of this. Met this woman, Kate Wenner. You recognize the last name. She was Jan Wenner's sister. When I graduated college, Kate was starting a magazine with Jan called Rolling Stone College Papers. There was an attempt to get Rolling Stone back in touch with its college audience, and they wanted college-age people. Yeah. I interned there during the daytime, And then the nighttime I had, through connections, I had a job as a copy boy at the New York Times. So I worked night side, which is what everyone wanted to do, so they could report during the day. But I didn't want to report. I wasn't interested in the New York Times for all sorts of reasons, but I knew I should be. So I worked at this magazine. The magazine went under very quickly, but I had this like magazine experience.
Yeah.
And Kate was an incredibly great editor and friend, and taught me a ton, as did Jan, actually. And then Esquire used to do a college issue. This is really way too much detail.
No,
right?
I love it. Keep going. No.
A college issue every September. I got hired to do the college issue because I just had this college experience. The day I got there, they folded the college issue. But it was too late. I was already there. No, it was great. And the other thing about Esquire was that the owners of Esquire were these two guys who had no magazine experience, really, from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Philip
One of them now notorious.
Philip Moffitt and Chris Whittle, yeah. And they had hired to make them feel more comfortable all the mandarins of the great period of Esquire. And so I, as this pipsqueak, got to work with all of the heroes that I had kind of worshipped from afar back in Long Island. So it was an amazing education in magazines. Very quickly did that for 6 years, then had a magazine idea, pitched it to Leonard Stern, who then owned the Village Voice. Everything's very circular, and he was looking to start another newspaper that would actually be able to get mainstream advertising, like Macy's and Bloomingdale's. And for some crazy reason, they took my idea, and I funded my idea, and we did this newspaper magazine called 7 Days.
Anybody remember 7 Days? Any New Yorkers here?
Yeah,
you have to be.
one person.
I remember because I worked in New York one summer that it was in the 2 years it was out.
Yeah.
And I remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was,
and
you
it's
know,
now, it's sort of like Brigadoon. It's a little bit like people look at it and say, oh my God, remember, so where is it now? It just,
they mostly
it appeared and then disappeared.
misremember it,
Yeah.
right? They have it has a much greater reputation in retrospect than it did in its time.
Don't we all? Yes.
But it was a gas, and it was a startup, and it because we didn't have any money, because it was on a kind of fraction of the Village Voice budget. I had to hire all children, and I was a child, and we blundered our way into something kind of different than what was out there, and what I, as a grown-up person, would have dismissed as being amateurish, came off as at least new.
Yeah.
And different, and it had its fans. It did go under after 2 years, and I should say that it went under largely because we started right at the moment, a little bit after, the stock market crash of '87, I guess. So the thing was doomed, and we just were like, living on its fumes of the economy fumes. And then some of those fans were at the New York Times. I went back to the New York Times. I had this crazy job there, in which I was Joe Lilliveld, who was then the managing editor, had liked the rank childishness of 7 Days, and wanted me to come in as a kind of wrecking ball type character inside the New York Times, and to go in, and as he said, go make trouble. That was my job description. But I did kind of have an opportunity to work with people who wanted to do change at the New York Times, which was at that time a very unusual thing. The place was very calcified. So I did that for a little bit, and then I went to the magazine where I actually thought I could do some good. And we had a chance to take the Times magazine and to think of it as a startup, because there was a attitude about it and financial muscle behind it to make it a national magazine, and not a newspaper supplement, which we did. And I did that for a bunch of years, and then I have a job not worth talking about, and then finally I got to New York Magazine, which started the whole thing
I'm going to ask you to
off.
explain this gap in your resume.
And then I was at New York for 15 years.
Yeah, and so what you have here is, I mean, Adam hates when people say this, but what you have here is essentially an icon of the magazine world. Probably the smartest, most capable editor. Like, you say to any magazine writer, Adam Moss, and they begin like sort of crossing themselves. They begin saying like secret prayers. So it's really kind of it's really incredible, the transformation that Adam was able to do. He also had a couple of, along with 7 Days, there was another startup along the way.
A start that never happened.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to the startup that never happened. But then a few years ago, at sort of the apex of all of this,
I quit.
yeah, tell us about that and what you're doing and how that inexorably led to this book.
All right. Finally, we got to the book. I left after 15 years. Honestly, I left because I felt I had aged out of editing New York. New York was largely for an audience that was younger than me, and I didn't really know how to. I never really knew how to edit for anyone but myself. So I had to, and it was not, I think, constructive for me to be there any longer. The staff was also younger. It was just in every way I kind of aged out, and that was fine with me because I also was. I mean, it was an amazing experience, full of more startups, by the way, because one of the things that made it interesting during all that time was that we probably invented over the course of my time there 20 magazines, digital magazines, once we had the tools
As part of New York, like
to make
The Cut.
Yeah, and the five
yeah.
that lasted
Yeah.
were The Cut and Vulture and Grub Street and Intelligencer and The Strategist. So it was a incredibly fertile period of invention, and that's always been what has turned me on about magazine making.
And yet you quit, and you decided
Right.
to do something
The
far
job.
afield.
Right. So I quit, and I didn't know what to do. My motivation was to quit, not to do something else. I didn't think I'd be able to figure out what I wanted to do unless I was actually separated, untethered from New York. And I had started to paint because in my magazine life, one of the parts of magazine making that was always the most interesting to me was the visual part. I loved working with images, telling stories with images, and so I decided to try myself. I have a place with my husband in Provincetown that used to be an art school, so there's like a kind of ghosty aspect to other painters up there, and I started to make paintings. And I was kind of good at first, actually, and then I got really bad. All of it, like, very quickly.
How'd you know you were really bad?
Because I have taste. And I was perplexed about why I was vain enough to have ambitions about it, and I didn't understand why I couldn't do this. And what I realized I wanted was to have some entrance into an artist's mind, or into many artists' mind, and I looked for a book that would try to take me there, and that book didn't exist. So against all of my better instincts, because I hated writing, and I had always decided that I would never write a book, I decided I wanted to write the book that I wanted to read. So that led me ultimately to this. More particularly, I have always had a kind of fascination with what John said I called, which I do, artifacts, which are kind of documents of the artist caught in the act of making art. So, I mean, the cover is one of them. It's a page from Proust that he has thousands of these pages where he violently crosses out. Those are his own crossings, not mine.
Adam hates
what
Proust.
he had written.
Yeah.
I've shockingly not really read that much of Proust, but anyway, the secret will stay here.
A lot of it wasn't very good, apparently.
Terrible. And so I wanted to build a book around these artifacts, notes and outlines and doodles and sketches and drawings on the way to making art. And then the book opens this way, but then I was in Bilbao, and I was flipping through a book in the souvenir shop, the gift shop, called Geary Draws. Frank Geary had designed the Guggenheim in Bilbao, and he, as one of his first impulses, he had just done this, what he calls a squiggle, a doodle that was pretty much exactly first flush out of his brain, the building he would go on to build. I have the squiggle and then a picture of Bilbao, the Guggenheim Bilbao, next to each other. It's kind of shocking, and things began to fall into place, and I began to conceive a book that would talk to artists and ask them, artists, I'm very, very liberal in how I define artists, novelists and visual artists and poets and songwriters and playwrights and sandcastle maker and chefs. They would take me through the making of one thing and try to reconstruct in as best as they could every decision that they made on the way to making the thing, so that each of them would be their own narrative. The subtitle of the book is How Something Comes from Nothing, and that's what it was. It was like you start with nothing. You start with
and the title, I think, is just, the title has a lot of resonance to me, at least. It's the work of art and how difficult it is for a lot of these artists, but it's also about the work process of it. And it is illustrated quite beautifully. You see the magazine DNA here, where you see the artifacts of, Stephen Sondheim marking up a song, or you see David Mandel from Veep editing a joke. You see Amy Silliman, the painter, various kinds of almost drafts of her
39 versions
paintings
of
and it's quite remarkable. So there are 43 of these in here, and it's also a beautiful book. How'd you pick the 43? Let's talk about who some of the people are, all right? So I'm just going to read a few random names here of people who are here, and just to give you the breadth. So Kara Walker, Tony Kushner, Roz Chast, the cartoonist, Michael Cunningham, the novelist, I guess he's a poet too, Louisa Gluck, passed away poet, Twilight Tharp, choreographer, dancer, just a whole array of the former editors of the New York Times on their front page. I mentioned Amy Silliman, Ira Glass, the audio radio dude, Will Shortz, that's his title, right?
Yeah.
Will Shortz, the crossword puzzle dude, just a whole variety of different people. So how'd you pick these?
Well, I mean, I started.
Who was the first person you went to?
The first person I went to was Michael Cunningham, because he's my friend.
Okay, Michael Cunningham. So tell us who Michael Cunningham is. Has anybody read The Hours? Okay, great. So a few of you have read The Hours.
So Michael,
extraordinary writer.
He's an extraordinary writer, and he wrote this extraordinary book that won the Pulitzer Prize, and he's written also a lot of other very good books. But I had this theory that maybe the artifacts of the making could lend itself to a sort of real, accurate reconstruction of the making of a thing. So I did an experiment. I went over to his studio and I said, let's find, if you're willing, let's find whatever evidence you have of the aborning of the Hours. And he wasn't sure whether he could find anything, and he opened a closet and piles of garbage bags flew out, filled with crumpled papers, and we scavenged through all the crumpled papers, finally found on a hard drive an early draft in which he wrote The Hours, or he wrote the beginning of The Hours, without Virginia Woolf in it. Virginia Woolf is the central, one of the three, but in most people's imagination, the central figure of The Hours. Nicole Kidman won an Oscar for it, et cetera. But it wasn't even there in the beginning. In the beginning, he was writing a kind of Chelsea Gay story that was based on Mrs. Dalloway as Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway as The Hours eventually was. And then he also found this, what I love, this notes to self, in which he's talking about how he's working his way through this, and it was just like archaeology. It was an incredible find. At one point, it's like, call it The Hours, question mark. And so that was the first experiment. And then I a little bit of my friend group, because I was nervous that this wouldn't work and people wouldn't be candid with me, and I felt at least a little trusting of my friends to be intimate. I wanted the book to be intimate. And, but then I went to my crushes, like my art crushes, and Kara Walker was a big art crush of mine. So she was very early in it. Tony Kushner was very early in it. Actually, the beginning of the book is fairly much in the order of me talking, but then it scrambles all over the place for reasons that are, I don't know, we can go into if you want.
So let's talk about, we brought up Michael Cunningham. So one of the things in the Michael Cunningham section is like, it's a pretty tortured process for him.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, he wrote.
I mean, here's this guy. It's like, so we see the end product, and it looks effortless. It looks graceful. It looks almost divine.
Yeah.
And if you talk to him and understand the process and actually see the process enacted on these pages,
it's crazy. Anyone,
crazy is a good word for it,
would have given it up. And it starts as this like gay novel that I'm describing, originally even called Mr. Dalloway. It then becomes, once Virginia Woolf enters into it, it becomes, I'm trying to remember all the iterations, but on one side of the page is the book, and on another side of the page is Virginia Woolf writing the book. He has all these kind of formal innovations that all seem to him to be utter crap. And this goes on for a year, which is actually a relatively short amount of time relative to the other people in the book, whose torture was even more torture. And finally gets the idea of these three women. He makes an association with his mother that enables him to understand how the book had to play out. But the chapter is really about why didn't you give up? I mean, giving up is was such a drive of my painting. I want to give up all the time. And
yeah, I mean, does anybody else out there like have that experience? If you're trying to create something, whether you're building a company, whether you're performing, whether you want to give up.
I want to give up. And
so why didn't he give up, Adam?
Because he's an artist.
Okay.
Largely because he understands that persistence is the thing that will possibly, if he gets what he wants, yield something interesting at the end. He also realizes that there's an undermining process that we all have when we're making something that would be present no matter what he was writing. So he might as well wrestle through it, hack through the wreckage with the book that he has that he is obsessed with. I mean, this is another very, very strong commonality, is that for these works to happen, there is a level of obsession that drives them through all of the incredible frustrations that happen externally, but also very, very much happen internally.
Yeah. There's obsessive is a word, and I don't think it's necessarily unhealthy. Although I think it begins to get close to that. No, you disagree.
It's nicely channeled. I mean, in other people, it would be unhealthy,
right.
And these people know how to make productive use out of several traits that as a culture we think of as destructive.
Right. I know you're loath to sort of explicit lessons for the rest of us from this book. You and I have talked about that, and so, but I've got a live mic.
Yep.
But I'm looking at sort of Michael Cunningham here.
Yep.
And Michael Cunningham, just the one that you picked out, there are these subheads there, and I think the
Yep.
subheads are instructive. So one of the subheads here for Michael Cunningham is the freedom of low expectations.
Right.
And I think that's a common thread too throughout this.
Yeah,
So tell us about
absolutely.
the freedom of low expectations.
Well, in his case, it was that he had written this. He'd written this book called Flesh and Blood that his publisher thought would be a big success, financial success, and it wasn't. And so he made peace with the idea that he was never going to be a best-selling writer, and he decided, okay, I'm going to write the little arty book that nobody will ever read. That gave him the freedom to experiment and take risks in all the ways that were important to the making of the Hours. And of course, this phenomenon of taking the expectations out of the equation is a very, very common theme.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of writing in longhand so that it doesn't count. There's George Saunders, the novelist, short story writer and novelist, and it's a novel that I'm talking about, gave himself, his book took 20 years, went through, was a play, was a short story, went through one kind of failed effort after another.
This is what became Lincoln in the Bardo.
What became Lincoln in
Yeah.
the Bardo. And he gave himself at one point a period that was otherwise dead, where he had written the book, but it hadn't yet written another book and hadn't yet come out, so it was kind of dead time. Permission to just fuck around. And that permission to fuck around enabled him to do this. Amy Silman knows when she starts making a painting that she will paint over the first, I'm making this up, but the first 30 paintings she makes. So that gives her the freedom to keep going. So there's many different aspects to it. There's the freedom of low expectations, but also there is the way in which the artists over and over again find ways to trick themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a game with themselves in which they try to subvert this negative force that's going to bear down on them unless they find a way to trick it. They're very superstitious. I mean, really, it was stunning to me.
What's an example of one of the superstitions that really stuck with you?
I mean, it's basically that it's basically all the ways in which they believe that this thing can go away. They don't understand how it is that they have the capacity to do this. They don't know where these things come from. And this was a big problem at the beginning in corralling people to be in the book, because a lot of artists won't even talk about it. They're afraid that if they talk about it, they'll jinx the muse. And so I had to find people who were very interested in the project that I was doing, which was a good thing because they were willing to commit to it.
And I think one of the things that works in this book is that not only it presumes at some level that we have access to how we do things and why we do things.
Yeah.
We don't always do that. And I think that the artifacts make up for that lack.
Yeah.
That is, you can I could be an unreliable narrator about myself, but if you look at my detritus, you look at my work product, you look
Right.
at the stuff that has gone away, it's like I can't hide
It
from
tells
that.
truth.
There's
Yeah.
a truthfulness to that.
Yeah.
And I think the pair of those two things together in this book makes it just incredibly powerful about the process. And you see very few books about the process of making stuff. And the process of making stuff is tortuous for everybody. I mean, it's heartening. If you're a creator or a maker of any kind, you read this book, you say, oh my God, I'm less crazy than I thought.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm
I
not
hope
alone.
people feel that way,
And
'cause
I
that's
think they
really-
do.
yes,
I think
yes.
they would, Adam. I do.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
here you go. Oh, you wanna? Let's talk about me for a moment. All right. Literally the next page. It's like there's a subhead called "The Better Book in Your Head." And it says, quoting Michael Cunningham, "You always have a better book in mind than you're able to write." The books that I've written some books. The books that I've had in mind are amazing. They're so freaking good. The books that you see in your hands, they're all right.
Yeah.
All right. And you know, one of the things you have to be able to do is survive the discrepancy between the book you were able to write and the better book you imagined. And there is this thing. So you also have the access. You have sort of a before, and then you have an after. And this book is really about what happens in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the before is skill training.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you have to kind of know what you're doing. It has to be in you. It's like an athlete. It's body memory. You have to know how to paint. You have to know how to put words together. You know all of that. And the end is also craft. It's like the making of the thing. And then there's this huge, vast middle, which is really about imagining spewing. It's about like just opening up your brain in some kind of childlike way and seeing what tumbles out of it. And then the next stage is judging and being able to see what it is that you've made and evaluate it and then make a strategy based on it. And that whole middle ground before craft takes over and after training is largely understood.
It's largely invisible. I mean, let's put a finer point on it. It's largely invisible, and the thing is, what you're doing is you're making it visible because you're bringing their thinking to the surface. But you're also bringing the artifacts, and the artifacts we can literally
really
see.
Well,
we can literally see. Another thing, I want you to talk about, just pick an artist who you like. The one thing that I wanted to pick up on is this. You mentioned sort of a conversation. One of the things that really struck me was how much these artists, who not all of them. Some of them are working in pairs. A few of them are working in teams, but a lot of them are solo.
Yeah.
But they're not.
Yeah.
Because the amount of time that they spend talking to themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's.
I mean, it's just incredible. So, like George Saunders, who is just extraordinary in talent. It's like there's the thing in here. It's like working on his book. It's like there's a memo to himself about his book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. And Michael Cunningham too.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of, hey, why do I need a partner when I have someone so interesting to talk to all the time?
Which is very hard to do. And that I think when
So what's going on there? That's my question. What the hell?
There's even this phrase. I will say this other thing, that there's this phrase that I call attention to because it was like you asked me about their hacks or superstitions. Many of them believe that the work itself is talking to them.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in some kind of
anybody who makes or creates ever feels like that. Like you ever say anybody like a writer, it's like this is. It doesn't work all that well in editors, and it's like, well, the work will tell me what to do next.
Yes. And if
but I believe that.
Sure, and you do, and
my
you have
editor
to.
doesn't, but I believe that. Yeah.
And so that you have to listen for it. And if you listen, I feel that way, as a kind of crummy painter. It's like the painting, if I keep working at this thing, the painting will tell me what it is it ought to be. So they construct a dialogue with themselves. They are like similar to the group of people that I made magazines with. These people have this crazy cacophony of voices in their own head, and they work through it.
It's really quite remarkable. It's like something
quite
that I would have never
amazing.
never would have thought of. But the idea of a writer writing a memo to himself is just so
it's
whacked.
crazy.
I love it.
You don't do that?
I hate writing. It's like to me, it's like, oh my God, you're doing
like
extra
more
writing.
Extra writing, yeah.
Why don't you just do quiet self-loathing like the rest of us?
And I should say a couple of things, just as threads. One is they're like, I mean, I didn't trust this exactly because I think all people report that they had lonely childhoods because that's what they remember. But these people all said they had lonely childhoods. So they began that process. And you know how like there's a little kid, like a little girl playing with dolls, and she's talking out loud. She's talking and mouthing the words that the dolls were saying to each other. This is the same thing that you see in an adult. And this childlike aspect, the childlike aspect married to adult facility.
Craft. Skills
is really sort of crucial to what's happening here. And then in terms of the artifacts telling the truth, there were any number of times. I mean, Louise Glick.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I get that. I do that all the time. Louise Glick sent me this stuff, and I said, and as we were talking about this poem she wrote called "Song," she said she told this whole story about the importance of the name of the character in the poem, and then I showed her the piece of paper and it had a different name on it. So she had completely misremembered this instance of creation, and a lot of these conversations had a little bit of therapy resemblance. There was a little bit of putting them on the couch, and a really interesting conversation came out as a consequence of that.
So I want to read the first few lines of that poem song.
Okay.
And then have you talk about where it came from.
Okay.
Okay. So the poem is called Song. Yeah, it says, Leo Cruz makes the most beautiful white bowls. I think I must get some to you. But how is the question in these times?
Right. So that
Okay,
came.
so it's sort of lovely. It sort of reminds me of the, what's that famous poem about the plums?
Oh yeah, the Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens, I think.
But
right?
Leo Cruz makes the most. I should have
William
rehearsed.
Carlos Williams.
William Carlos.
Okay.
Leo Cruz
Yeah.
makes the most beautiful white bowls. I think I must get some to you. But how is the question in these times?
This was a COVID poem, and so.
And how did it come to her?
The how it came to her in a dream. She.
And she's not the only one.
She's not the
like
only
these people
person.
have dreams that are iterative.
And she
and
uses her
generative.
dreams.
Yeah,
and
that's
she
my
like
point.
makes
Tell us
something
about
great
dreams
out of it.
and how they use dreams. Yeah.
We all dream, but she had this dream, and this line came to her, which was very similar. I can't remember the exact syntax, but it was very similar to the first line of the poem. And she became obsessed. It wouldn't let her go, this line, even though as she would tell it to other people, they would say, "What?" There was a kind of plainness, ordinariness to the line in everyone else's hearing, but to her, she began to see a poem in it, and just as you read that out loud, I realized to what extent it begins as a COVID poem. I must get them, but how?
In these times.
In these times, something I thought came in later in the poem. Anyway. These things are so rich, they have multiple readings.
So she came to a dream, and then one of the first ones that I read was, because this is also a very interesting book where we're talking to a bunch of people here. Well, I'll ask you, is this, you want people to read this book in order?
I do, but I know that they won't.
They don't.
You didn't read it in order.
No way.
And
I read it in its entirety. I read it in its entirety, but I didn't read it in sequence. Because it's 43 separate discrete things, and in that sense, it's sort of made like a magazine. Because a magazine, you don't necessarily have to read a magazine from page 1 all the way to page 112.
Although every magazine editor likes you to.
Yeah, but you design magazines so they have different points of entry, right?
Yeah, no, so that you recognize that it's futile.
Yeah.
That people will read according to their interests. People read the people they are fans of or know of even.
I want to sort of demonstrate that point here in a moment. Let's say just one beat on Tony Kushner,
Yeah.
which is I actually read the first two in order and then I started bopping around. There's a Tony Kushner, Angels in America. So does anybody remember the final scene in Angels of America?
Of the first play.
one, the first half.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes, where he comes crashing through, or
the angel comes crashing through the ceiling.
The angel comes crashing through the ceiling. It's this incredible thing, and it's staged in a number of different ways. It was, if you saw the HBO series, it was done there. I remember seeing a play in Washington, seeing a version of it in Washington, and they did it in a really clever, inventive way. But it's just kind of whacked out, like an angel crashing through the ceiling. How did he come up with that, Adam?
He dreamt it. So basically, in his story, he becomes. I mean, the whole book is really about associations, following associations, like breadcrumbs is a phrase that he uses. And in this case, he had this deep crush on this ballet dancer or dancer, and the dancer got sick, and he learned that the dancer had died of AIDS, and went to sleep, and he dreamt that an angel crashed through the ceiling, and there was his friend, his now dead friend, Bill. And that's one of the most iconic images of all of 20th century theater.
Absolutely.
And it came to him in this dream, and then he had to chase it. And then this chasing is the is the work.
Yeah, no, it really blew me away.
And it's never been done the way he's obsessed with the fact that it's never been done the way he dreamed it. Every production of it has like failed to. It's the book in your head. It's failed to conjure this image in the way in which he saw it.
Let me pick up on that for a moment, because I think it could be at the root of the obsession. Not only that, but also this idea that you hear from the voices of a lot of these artists about how it's close, but it's not quite there.
Yeah.
Even the finished product.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like this quest for something, and you never get there.
Yeah.
And that's simultaneously frustrating and alluring.
Well, it's motivating.
Yeah.
You know, and it's it's frustrating and alluring, and it also, I mean, one of the striking things that everybody told me, I mean, to the extent that I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller. This is what I've been doing all my life. And in a story, you want an ending that is kind of boffo. And so I kept pressing for the release at the end, the exaltation, hey, I made this crazy masterpiece. And nobody ever feels that they have.
No.
Nobody ever really takes too much time to even acknowledge that this thing that they've made, they just go on the next day and make another. It's what...
Is that healthy or unhealthy?
It's bizarre. But I think it's... but it's for me, it's... I mean, like one of the lessons of this book for me was like the work itself is the reason you make something. It's not the thing you're making. And that has been in my own
the work
struggle,
of art.
The work of art, there you go. In my own struggles as a painter, that's been very liberating. I no longer, I can't say I don't care, but I no longer obsess over the fact that the work, the thing has problems. I instead relish the experience I have making the thing, and that becomes the joy of it.
Tell us about one artist from here who you just think you like talking to and you learn something from, and you think,
oh my
has an
God,
interesting
so
story.
many.
I mean,
but I'll talk about Amy Sillman.
Great.
Because
Painter,
she's...
and not necessarily, like, not as well known as a visual artist as, say, Barbara Kruger in here.
Well, Barbara Kruger was fun to talk to, but Amy Sillman was fascinating to me.
It's a great chapter because there's a lot of cool pictures.
Yeah, so that she...
No, I mean it.
That's true.
Yeah.
So I went to her. She, like, her whole idea about painting is that it's like a game of musical chairs where it doesn't matter where you end up. At a certain point, she stops making pictures, and that becomes the picture that other people get to see, and those become the pictures that sell for $1 gazillion, and that have made her into a very venerated artist. And I found that just amazing. She typically, always, paints over picture after picture after picture that if anyone else did it, I promise you, they would just go right to heaven because they're so beautiful. And she's the only person who ever sees it before she paints it over. And I did find this fascinating. And then she was...
Did you find that painful? I sort of wince when I hear that.
I definitely find it painful. I find it so, so self-sabotaging. But she doesn't find that at all. So she thinks sabotage is what making art is all about. She talks like that. She's also very funny. And she was willing to share with me, well, ultimately, she made over 100 versions of this one painting called Miss Gleason. I published 39 of them. And they are wildly different from one another. You could see kind of her train of thought as she goes this way and that way and this way and that way, and then wipes the whole thing down and starts again and goes this way and that way and this way and that way. And she kind of narrates it for me. I also just kind of fell in love with her. So
also
I
in
picked
here,
her just now.
Also, another interesting inclusion here is two of the editors of the New York Times their iconic front page from May 2020, where it says the headline here. So the folks who are listening to the podcast won't be able to see this, but the 1,500 people here in Radio City Music Hall will. It says U.S. deaths near 100,000, an incalculable loss, and it's just a recitation of the people who perished from.
Very similar
COVID.
in effect to Maya Lin's
Yeah.
Vietnam Memorial.
Yeah. And so you said you got some pushback about whether this counts as art.
Well, this question dogged me during all of this, which is, was I too loose with the term art? And I felt if this was an academic book, maybe the answer is yes. But I felt that for the purposes of what I was doing, it wasn't. So the pushback was not, I ignored the pushback. But yeah, people said, what are you doing in a newspaper front page? But this front page, particularly given my own history at the New York Times and my knowledge of the place as a place that is very set in its ways, does everything according to extremely incremental change. Or this was the case in my experience there, my life there. And then I woke up to this image, which was so, and the front page in particular was a place of, it was like aged in wood. It was it was like shellacked. And this one page was such a wrenching departure from, it wasn't information anymore. It was really meant to create an effect. It was all about its affect.
And the effect that it had, there's a lovely phrase, I don't remember which of the editors said it. They compare.
Yeah.
Which
well, if it's the Rothko line?
Yeah.
No, that was Dean Baquet.
So Dean Baquet compared it to a Rothko painting.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, he says that like with a Rothko painting, you have one first impression, and the further into it you go, the sort of deeper your understanding of it. And nobody would read this front page in order to isolate a given name. It's not what it's about. It's about an overall impression of the monumentality of the loss of COVID that was May from March.
But like a Rothko, the longer you look at it, the sadder you get.
The sadder you get,
Yeah,
right? That's
that's
line.
just like,
Yes.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Because
That's-
I'm just looking at it
that's right.
now, and I'm thinking, good God.
Yeah.
It doesn't function in the way that a typical newspaper headline
Yeah,
would.
yeah.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
The longer you look at it, the sadder you get. All right, I want to try a little experiment here among the crowd in Radio City Music Hall. Just to show you, again, I think it's interesting. I think this book is super interesting because of its bookness. It's a beautiful book. This is not a book you want to read in, well, you should buy the e-version if that's your jam, but the book itself is really beautiful, and it has a weight to it. It's a book that you want. It's a book you want to touch. It's a book you want to open. But I think it's interesting how many other people had the experience that I had of not reading in order. And
Most people.
And so just to show you that
Alas.
you could truly open to any page in this book and learn something. So here's what I want to do. Does anybody here in this vast hall share my initials, DP? Anybody share my first initial, D? Okay. Tell me your first name? David. All right, David, I want you, this is like sort of my Kreskin bit here. I want you to pick a number between 1 and 43.
37.
Wrong. 37. All right. 37. So we're just going to see who's number 37 in this list. And we're going to talk about that. And I guarantee that you will learn something. Number 37. Oh, pretty good one.
Who?
Sheila Heti.
Oh, Sheila Heti, all right.
Okay. So tell us who Sheila Heti is, and then what we can learn from Sheila Heti.
Okay.
Now,
So
how many people here have heard from Sheila Heti? Heard of Sheila Heti?
Okay.
I actually had not before reading this.
Okay,
Okay.
so-
But for those of you listening at home, we have about, I would say maybe, let me see the hands again. So it's about
A third. No.
a quarter
Yeah.
of people, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So tell us who Sheila Heti is, what she does, and what we can learn from her.
She is a writer. She's a Canadian novelist, and sometimes she writes really interesting nonfiction books as well. And she wrote this book called How Should a Person Be? that's kind of a classic among certain cohorts, young women in particular, but not exclusively that at all, and is considered one of the pioneering works of autofiction, the fiction which comes out of one's own life in some way. It's kind of a mix between autobiography and fiction. The main character of this book is named Sheila. Her best friend is named Margot. That is also Sheila's best friend. It is a very it's an audacious book. It's a book that tries to kind of rewrite the rules of what a novel is. It's a kind of incredible book in that regard. And in order to write it, because she had never read a book like this before, nor had she ever written a book before, she created a cosmology, a kind of tarot-like cosmology. Just flash the montage.
This here?
Because this is like, it's just, you can't even see it, but it's like, this is just a bunch of stuff that I put together, but it has like word associations, and it has a weird hourglass, and it has charts, and it has this like crazy way in which a sine curve interrupts a grid.
Yeah,
and
it's a little nutty.
It's nutty.
Yeah, it's a little bit like, oh, the police broke in and there's a giant board there with string going everywhere.
It is kind of nutty, and she is like, really, if you ever met her, she's a incredibly implacable person. You wouldn't see the kind of lunatic that there is in all of us, I should say. But was here manifest in this really elaborate visual world that she created that nobody else can understand, and that she, even when she brought it all over to me in this huge like bag of tricks, even she did not remember. She could not explain it, and it was it was too foreign to her now. But when she wrote it, it actually gave her the roadmap to figuring out how to write this book. And she explains, I won't try to paraphrase her, but she explains in detail how creating this world for herself only manifested itself in a book that doesn't have any resemblance to the world of the map. She's a
and these tarot cards give us, I think, again, I'm always going to push you to sort of what can the
person learn?
What can we learn? But because it's there, Adam, it's there. Okay, so I think that from
this
her,
is what you do so well.
It's from her and you say it explicitly.
Yes.
About combination.
Yes.
Like imagination is combination.
Yes.
So what does she mean by that?
Well, I don't remember what she means exactly, but
she says she talks about she created these 4 decks of cards.
Yeah. Keep going.
And then paired them, and then paired them up.
Yeah.
I mean, this is wackadoodle, man.
Yeah.
It's like 4 decks of cards. Each card represented each deck represented a different aspect of the universe or life. I broke all the elements of life into 4. Blah, 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 blah. There were 30 different actions of the gods, 60 different human qualities, 90 universal symbols, and a grid. And so what you have is all these kinds of combinatorial possibilities.
Yeah, that. Okay. And she then tried to explain that to her originally her editor at Farrar Straus rejected the book, and she sent this crazy letter, which I excerpt in the chapter as well, trying to explain this cosmology, which the editor was unmoved by, and then someone else published it, and it became a big hit. But she means this. She was not really alone in creating a kind of, I mean, hers was the most elaborate probably, but in creating a kind of cosmos which was a little bit not dissimilar from the notes to self or the sketches people make.
Yeah.
The various ways in which what they're doing is there's all this stuff going on in here, and they have to figure out a way to get it out in order for it to be in a place that they can evaluate it, so that there's a kind of dialogue between their unconscious and their conscious that results in these tools. This is one kind of tool, and all artists have other kinds of tools to make manifest the disorder that is in their brain.
Yeah, and she also talks to herself. I mean, you have here a note to herself. There's a note in this book. It's like written in almost like crayon or something. It says, "Can what is ugly be made beautiful?"
Which is an explicit theme of the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yes.
But even that is in some ways like you can imagine like that in a gallery. It's just a freestanding work of art right there.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, all of the artists are in some meaningful conversation with themselves that in some respects would look almost disassociated.
Yeah.
But they are able to make.
That's interesting. Yeah.
They are able to make some productive use out of. I mean, they all. It's interesting. One thing that came up a lot was that people would describe themselves as having ADD or ADHD, and I don't think they all did,
No.
but they were describing a thing, which was true, which is that they had this kind of distractibility, which we associate with ADD, and they also had, for high-functioning people with ADD, they also had this ability to have extreme focus. So that combination of letting your mind wander and then to bear down became kind of the story. I mean, I before I talked about child and adult, and that I began to see that all over the place. That they had to, some of us are anal and some of us are kind of spaced out. And they were able to be both anal and spaced out, and they were able to flip back and forth with a kind of flexibility that struck me as very unusual.
Yeah, I think that there is that kind of, and I'm thinking about it as dissociative.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually a really interesting way to put it. And it reminds me of like these people talking to themselves and being different characters in your head.
Yeah.
And so there is this kind of tension, there is this kind of child and adult.
Yeah.
All right, and actually Kevin Kelly has this great line. He says, if you want to know what to do with your life, do what made you weird as a kid.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic advice. If you think about the things that you did that were like you were obsessed by and it made you weird as a kid, it's like I still find myself returning to a lot of those things. So kid and adult, there is this tension between kind of I mean, you say it's even better. It's a good line. It's like anal and spaced out. Mm-hmm. And then there also is something going on between sort of the need to complete, but also the need to iterate.
Yeah.
And all these things kind of exist. So there's just it's so incredibly rich. Two final questions before we go to the audience. What has doing this helped you? How, if at all, has this helped you as a painter?
It hasn't actually helped me paint any better, I'm sorry to say. But it has, as I said before, it has made the process much more interesting for me because I'm not so, my frustration does not overwhelm my pleasure.
Interesting. Had it before? I mean, it seems
it
like
had,
it. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Because I was so, I'm very results oriented. Just as I'm a kind of type A personality, and that's what has always moved me. And in this case, I was
you also spent 25, 30 years cranking something out every week.
Right.
Yeah.
With a whole bunch of other people
yeah.
who were my, the community of makers was really what has always moved me. And then here I am in this room, and I didn't know how to do it, and now I kind of do know how to do it and know how to surrender to it and find that my own dissociative state to be not something to make me anxious, but to enjoy, to indulge, and see where it takes me. Is it, I do think maybe my paintings are getting a little better, but I don't want to credit the book for that.
Is there anybody, so there are 43 artists in here.
Yep.
Anybody who you would really, really want to talk to for this, to do the same kind of thing? Talk to them about their process, collect their artifacts, show the world how it works?
Anyone else that's not in the
who's
book?
not in here, yeah.
Oh my God, thousands
Name
of
one.
people. Frank Ocean.
Oh,
For one reason is that he puts out a song, then he redoes the song, and then he redoes the song after it's out in the world. So there's a kind of public iteration of that, which
That's fascinating,
found
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Also, I really like his work a lot. There were so many. I mean, I'm now going to start to do new installments of this for New York Magazine, my old home.
When do those come out?
As soon as I do them.
Okay.
So I'm back in the game of. So if anyone has any good ideas about people I should talk to, I'm all ears. But as I said, it's a very specialized kind of person who's willing to give of themselves this way. I mean, there's an inherent generosity and also a willingness to be vulnerable. It's a very, very vulnerable making a book like this, or talking about this thing that kind of they just want people to see the result and not the workings, the mechanics.
Right. Well, I think it's a fabulous contribution. Again, we're talking in October, so it's still my favorite book of the year. And I hope
3 more months.
I hope that everybody gets a copy. Let's give Adam a big round of applause. And then, Michael, we're going to move to Q&A.
Okay.
And God will be. God, are you there?
I'm here.
It's
yes.
me, Daniel. Yeah.
So these are questions that came in from the audience. If anyone still wants to get one in, you can go to that QR code or that code on the screen and add them. Here's one. If low expectations are freedom, then high expectations are a prison. By what means do artists successfully deal with high expectations for their work?
I think they try to trick themselves into not having the high expectations. I think that high expectations are a prison. And I think that they have to take that load off. I would say that was fairly universal. They have to get rid of the idea that people are watching them, people are expecting something from them. Even though they've internalized it, they know it, but they can't work within it.
Fantastic. God, what else?
All right. What role does the unconscious mind play in the artistic process? In your conversations with artists, did they talk about tapping into the deeper unseen, tapping into their unconscious?
Oh, absolutely, everywhere. I mean, we talked about the dreams, Tony Kushner's dream, Louise Gluck's dream, but in almost all ways, there's a chapter I really like about an artist named Cheryl Pope, who has her 3rd miscarriage, and she comes to the conclusion and the realization that she will never have a child, and this tortures her. And she finds herself, her unconscious is she finds herself potting plants in her apartment because she wants to believe she can grow something. And then she recognizes that this act of potting, and particularly this image she has of reaching over to the potted plant, is the beginning, the germ of a work she wants to make, in which eventually, I won't belabor it, but eventually the plant becomes a child. And the plant becomes, at first, a universal child, and then she makes a decision to make it a specific child. And she draws a face on the child and meets the child, in effect, that she couldn't have, and gives a face to the mother. And this war in herself between opening or closing, between making it universal or making it specific, is kind of the tension of the piece. But it begins in the unconscious. It begins in what she's doing with this plant, and how, without being deliberate or conscious about it, she has created the composition and structure of the thing that becomes the work.
It's a very well-told story because of you see the progression of the images that end up leading to this very beautiful where it's not even a painting.
Well, I mean, she calls it a painting, but
Yeah.
it's a felt.
not with paint.
She
Yeah.
she uses felt
Yeah.
as the way to punch. She punches felt through
Yeah.
to create this thing, and I had seen it first. Talk about the artifacts. I had seen it first. This incredibly beautiful rendering of this thing when it was just a study and it was empty. That was the thing that made me want to talk to her so badly, because I just thought this was the most beautiful thing. And it was not the only time where I thought the iteration was even more powerful than the finished thing.
Okay. Artificial intelligence, friend or foe?
Both? I'll leave it at that.
Are you using it in any of your work? Anything you're doing?
You know, I've never made an image with it. I used it a little, when I was struggling with some parts of the book, I played with AI a bit to see whether the AI could write the book for me, which didn't work, thank God. But,
Thank God for us, yeah.
But I mean, thank God for me too. I would have felt terrible about it. But I think but I did have some fun with playing. I just got into this game habit with it. Like it would give me something, and then I would say weirder, 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 and it responded to my my prompts in this way, and it did get weirder, 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 and it was in its way creative. It was hard for me to say it wasn't creative. So, in that way, I think it is very helpful. If it substitutes for the human, I think that would be bad. But I think that one can use it well, I hope.
There are a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, and builders in this room. How can we apply the artist's process to the work of building a business?
Yeah, I knew that question was going to come up.
It didn't come from me, man.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't presume to know enough about what you've done. I will speak to my own. I mean, I've had a lifetime of startups.
Yeah.
Startups is what was my basic MO as an editor. And I would say that in many ways, the process, the loop, is kind of the same, except it's with a bunch of people as opposed to one person. It's like you get a bunch of you have an idea, just a glimmer of an idea. Okay, that's enough. You get a bunch of people together, and you give the idea to them and ask them to play with it and to explode the thing. Then you all together look at what you all together have spewed, in a sense. And out of that spewing, you, perhaps as the leader of this group, have judgment. I hope you have judgment. That's kind of what you're there for. And you can pick of the thing, what is the thing that is most interesting to you or productive to your mission as you've defined it. And then you give it back to the group, and the group tries to put sort of real-life circumstances into it and to test it. And then you see whether it stands the test. And then also, if it's not working, you scrap it altogether.
Do you think you could do a book like this for groups? Like you look at I don't know, like a theater company like Steppenwolf Theater.
I do,
or
and it occurred to
dance
me.
Group or,
Or partnerships.
Duos. Oh yeah.
There are a couple of partnerships I do in the book, and I.
The Sandcastle guys.
Well, no, they were not partners because they didn't do anything together.
Oh.
They're in the same chapter because there's a chapter about the building of a sandcastle that Ian Adelman, who's a designer I've worked with for a million years, a digital designer mostly, who's a genius at that. He also showed me one day these crazy sandcastles he'd built, and so I wanted to talk to him about the making of something that disappears at the end of the day. But then when I was praising his sandcastles, he said, I'm nothing like this other guy. And I said, well, have you ever talked to the other guy? He said, no. I said, all right, you're going to do that. So this is my magazine background. So I created an opportunity for them to talk to each other, but they never built anything together. Yeah, but I think I could, and I think it would be interesting, and I'm not sure I want to, but I'm very, personally, I'm not nor as a book, but I'm very interested in the way that groups work, and I'm very interested in the way that partnerships work, and how tension, in particular, actually is constructive or can be constructive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned at some point the Peter Jackson movie about the Beatles somewhere in here.
Yeah. Well, that was very, when it's a famous moment in the movie in which Paul McCartney is riffing. I was just talking about this today, actually. Paul McCartney is riffing on his guitar, and you hear the beginnings of the song "Get Back" in this documentary, and it's like, wow, you're actually seeing the moment of emergence. It's crazy. And that was inspiring to me about writing the book. I wanted to try to figure out a way to do that in a two-dimensional context like a book.
Saul Bellow said, "The writer is a reader moved to emulation." What did the folks you talked to for the book have to say about the power of influences?
Huge. But influence is, and influence comes up over and over and over again. It's crucial. There's, interesting dialogue in this chapter on Gregory Crutzen, the photographer who does these amazing kind of giant scenario prints that look like stills of a movie. He talks very much about, he feels sometimes stuck in his own influences, and he talks about influences leaving an imprint on you when you're young, and then you can't escape that. Other people are constantly adjusting their influences as they go on. For myself, I know that I'm extremely impressionable. I'm very impressionable, and my influences constantly change, and my work constantly changes in a way that's, I don't think, terribly constructive. So they come that way, and then a lot of what influence is about is inhaling it, integrating it, and then throwing it away. Because you can't just like you can't, high expectations can inhibit you, so can an influence which is too intense, that it begins to strangle your own work.
Yeah.
But you have to have it in you.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who is overly influenced isn't going to make it into this book.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to be singular enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
At some level, I think this book is operating to get rid of misconceptions people have about the creative process. So what is a misconception that people have about creativity and the creative process that you hope that this book dispels so that more of us can be creative?
Well, I'll tell you my own misconception.
Lay it on us.
All right, so my own misconception going into it was I had an extremely romantic idea about what making art was about, and I felt that it was all about the flow, and and that is important, and you do get to a stage where that happens. But the reality of it is that it is incredibly hard work, and it is quite a bit of it is tedious. And if you're going to find it tedious, and if you're going to find it tormenting in that respect, you need to be interested. You absolutely need to have a kind of consuming interest in something, or you're not going to make it to the finish line. So I would say that dispelled my fantasy, taking the context of painting, that I could just take the brush and just do whatever I wanted like I was a 2-year-old. 2-year-olds make some great paintings, but they also make a lot of terrible paintings. And, so that was...
So it's a fitting way to end, because it's not some kind of romantic journey.
Yeah.
It is.
It's a bummer.
The work. No, it's the work. It's the art is work. And now we have a great Bible for all of us who are trying to create great stuff. So everybody give a big round of applause to Adam.